They laughed, not the polite, tight-lipped kind of laughter you give when you don't get the joke but don't want to seem rude. No. This was the full-bodied, stomach-grabbing, you can't be serious kind. I remember their faces under the flickering classroom lights, pale from too much screen time, framed by those ironic tote bags that read "Support the Arts" while they tore down anyone who actually tried to. I had just told them, very earnestly, that I wanted to be an artist, not graphic designer, not illustrator, not creative director at a startup with beanbags, an artist. The kind that paints until their fingers are raw, that talks to canvases, that fails most of the time but somehow keeps showing up anyway. Be realistic, my art teacher said, tapping her red pen against my sketch. The market doesn't reward weird. Try drawing something more commercial. Commercial. The word stuck to my tongue like bad gum. Back then, my art was confusing, I guess. Faces that melted into typewriters, hands that grew from ceilings, and colors that looked like a glitching sunset. To me, it was honesty, the way my mind actually worked when it wasn't filtered through polite conversation. To them, it was visual noise. That was her exact phrase, visual noise. I remember walking home that day with my sketchbook hugged against my chest, like a wounded pet. It was raining, and of course, I had forgotten an umbrella, so by the time I got to my tiny apartment, my drawings looked like they were crying too. The paper wrinkled, the ink bled, and in a way, I liked it better that way. Art that didn't behave was the only kind that made sense to me. My parents didn't take the announcement much better. Artist? My dad said, as if I'd declared I was joining a circus. Can you make a living out of doodling? Mom tried to soften it with a smile that was all worry and no warmth. Maybe you can teach. You've always been good with kids. Yes, perfect. Teach kids how to dream small, so they can grow up and tell someone else not to dream at all. That night, I sat on the floor with a half-eaten cup of ramen and a sketchpad full of visual noise. I remember thinking, maybe I am weird. But weird felt like the only thing that was actually mine. I painted late that night, until my eyes stung. My brush danced without direction, blue into red into brown into something nameless. At one point, I dropped a blob of paint by accident, and it looked like a teardrop hitting the surface. I left it there. Mistakes had more soul than perfection. Anyway, funny thing is, I used to think I'd outgrow that insecurity, that once I made it, I'd look back at these moments and laugh. But the truth is, I still hear their voices sometimes. The laughter, the be realistic, the you'll see how hard life is, they echo between brushstrokes. And yet, if you had told me back then that one day, those same people would walk into a sleek office lobby, look up, and see my too weird painting framed in gold, well, I'd probably have laughed too. For now though, I was still just the weird one, the one with paint under their nails, overdue rent, and a head full of images no one wanted to see. Still, every night when I washed my brushes under the kitchen faucet next to unwashed dishes and a flickering fluorescent bulb, I felt something quiet. Not hope exactly, but persistence. Like the world hadn't quite managed to convince me to stop. I guess that's how most revolutions begin, with stubbornness disguised as stupidity. Rent was due again, and my wallet was doing its best impression of an empty echo chamber. I'd gotten very good at the math of survival, calculating how many packets of ramen equaled one paintbrush, and how many nights I could go without heat before my fingers stopped cooperating. Spoiler: 3.5. My apartment wasn't really an apartment. It was a slightly upgraded storage closet with a kitchen sink that coughed instead of running, and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor arguing with his cat. Not about his cat with it. The cat usually won. I spent mornings applying for anything remotely art-adjacent: gallery assistant, junior illustrator, set decorator for high school theater. And by noon, my inbox would fill with variations of the same polite rejection. Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, We have decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience better aligns with our needs. Translation: we like people who don't make us uncomfortable. The only emails that didn't reject me were from spam bots, telling me I do want a free cruise or could enlarge my creative potential by buying some dubious online course. For a while, I considered replying. Most nights, I worked on commissions from strangers' online portraits of their pets dressed as Renaissance nobility, or digital caricatures of couples with hearts and hashtags. They paid just enough to keep the lights on, and I told myself it was practice, the kind of practice that made me question my life choices while painting a corgi in a powdered wig. But when the city quieted down, and the hum of traffic softened into something almost like a heartbeat, I pulled out my real canvases, the ones I didn't show anyone. I painted feelings I couldn't name, long streaks of blue that felt like missing something you never had, or tangled lines that looked like thoughts trying to escape. Sometimes I'd laugh at myself, who paints loneliness at 3 a.m. and calls it work, but the joke was kind of comforting, like an inside joke with my own misery. My hands smelled like turpentine, my shirt had become a canvas itself, and my coffee tasted faintly of regret. But I was alive, barely, but honestly. One night, I got an email from my father. Subject line: have you thought more about grad school? I hadn't. I wrote back something neutral like, still exploring options, which really meant, still ignoring your dream for me. He responded with a thumbs up emoji. That was our relationship in a nutshell, passive-aggressive approval. There were moments I almost gave in. When I saw my friends in their office selfies, crisp suits, stable salaries, lunch breaks in sunlight, I felt that familiar ache. They called it success. I called it beige. Then one evening, I wandered into a small gallery down the street. It was the kind of place that smelled like expensive candles and fragile egos. The walls were lined with minimalist art, black dots on white backgrounds, frames worth more than my rent. People sipped white wine like it was an accessory. I lingered near a painting that looked like a printer error and whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." A woman next to me nodded, mistaking my sarcasm for admiration. The emptiness is so intentional. I smiled. Yeah, very empty. That night, I went home furious, not at the art, but at myself for caring, for feeling small in front of something I didn't even like. So I painted. I didn't plan it. I just threw everything I'd been swallowing onto a canvas: anger, exhaustion, that stupid printer error painting. The result looked like chaos meeting confession. I stepped back and stared at it. It was ugly. It was raw. It was me. I didn't know it then, but that painting, the one born out of spite and cheap ramen, would change everything. For now, though, I had another rejection waiting in my inbox and a landlord who didn't accept exposure as currency. I went to bed listening to the soft tap of rain on the window, imagining it was applause from a kinder universe. And as I drifted off, I thought maybe the world doesn't hate weird art. Maybe it just hasn't noticed it yet. Some people meditate. I paint until my brain stops screaming. There's a thin line between passion and breakdown, and most nights I danced on it barefoot. The clock would slide past midnight, then 2, then 4, while the city outside went quiet enough that I could hear my own pulse. That was usually when I made the best mistakes or the worst art, depending on your taste. I started keeping a ritual. Boil water, instant coffee, cheap music through cheaper headphones, and a promise to myself: no thinking, just moving. The first stroke was always the hardest, like ripping the lid off a buried emotion. After that, it was a trance. Sometimes I painted for 6 hours straight and forgot to eat. Sometimes I painted for 10 minutes and ended up staring at a wall for the rest of the night, convinced I was a fraud in acrylics. There's something about painting alone at 3 a.m. that makes time melt. Colors stop behaving. You start seeing the world in shades that don't exist in daylight. One night, I remember watching the paint drip down my canvas, slow and deliberate, like it knew something I didn't. The drip was hypnotic, beautiful, in the way heartbreak sometimes is. That's when I started calling my process emotional archaeology. Every brushstroke felt like digging up something I'd buried years ago: disappointment, resentment, the hunger to be seen. It wasn't pretty, but at least it was honest. There were nights when I'd stop mid-stroke and just laugh at how ridiculous it all was, me, hunched over a canvas like a deranged monk, trying to turn existential dread into something hangable. I'd mutter to myself, "Congratulations, Picasso of pain," and take another sip of lukewarm coffee. Humor was survival. My walls started filling up, canvases stacked against each other, colors bleeding from one painting to the next. It looked like my apartment had caught feelings. I couldn't afford new supplies, so I painted over old work, letting ghosts of past attempts peek through the layers. If you looked close enough, every piece was a collage of failures pretending to be new. One morning, I woke up to sunlight bouncing off an unfinished canvas, and for a second, I thought it looked good. Not sell it at Sotheby's good, but maybe I'm not delusional good. The piece was wild reds clawing through blues, a smear of gold like a secret. I named it Nervous System. It felt right, like painting my own wiring. I uploaded a photo of it online, mostly out of boredom. 2 likes. One was from my mom. The other was a bot selling nths. But then something odd happened. A stranger left a comment. "There's tension here. It feels alive." I didn't know who they were, no profile picture, no followers, but that one line hit harder than all the rejections combined. Someone saw it, even if they were probably just another insomniac with Wi-Fi. That tiny flicker of validation pushed me to finish the series. I painted 3 more pieces in the same style, all movement, emotion, and mess. My apartment looked like a war zone of color. The floor was a crime scene of dried paint, and I was the happy culprit. Of course, between the bursts of creativity came the crash. The mornings where my hands trembled too much to hold a brush, where every painting looked like proof I was faking it. I'd sit in the corner eating cereal out of a mug because all my bowls were full of paint water. But even on the worst days, there was something addictive about creating something out of nothing. I'd whisper to myself, "Keep going, even if no one claps." It was half pep talk, half plea. One night, I looked around and realized my walls were full, my rent was due, and I was out of both canvas and money. So, out of sheer desperation, or maybe hope, I decided to enter a small local art show. The entry fee was $20, which I didn't have, but I sold an old sketchbook online for $25 and called it fate. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my parents, not even the neighbor with the argumentative cat. It felt too fragile to share. Like if I said it out loud, the universe would laugh again. That show would be the first time anyone saw my art in person. The first time I'd stand in a room full of strangers and silently ask, "Do you see me now?" Of course, I didn't know yet that the answer would come with both laughter and something far more valuable hiding behind it. The gallery smelled like pretension and white wine. You could taste the insecurity in the air, that mix of ambition and fear that clings to creative people like humidity. The event was called Emerging Voices, which I guess meant artists desperate enough to pay the entry fee. I'd shown up early, carrying my canvas like a fragile secret. My piece, Nervous System, looked so alive in my apartment. But under those sterile gallery lights, it suddenly seemed small, nervous, like it had shrunk on the way there. I hung it myself, adjusting the wire 3 times until it was perfectly straight, then stood back. The label underneath read, title, Nervous System Artist, my name medium, acrylic on canvas, price, $500. I almost crossed it out and wrote, "Please love me." As people began to trickle in, the room filled with chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint sound of an indie jazz playlist. Trying too hard, I hovered near the snack table, pretending to be fascinated by the cheese cubes. Every time someone walked near my piece, I'd casually glance over the way you might check if someone is looking at you in a mirror. A couple stopped in front of it. The woman tilted her head. "It's chaotic." Her partner squinted. "Yeah, my kids' finger paintings look like that after cereal." They laughed, the same brand of laughter I'd heard all my life. Familiar, predictable, a little too loud. I took a sip of my cheap wine and told myself it didn't matter. Artists are supposed to be misunderstood. Still, when I overheard one of the other exhibitors call my piece "Anxiety on Canvas," I nearly choked on a cracker. Not because it was wrong, but because it was accurate. The night blurred into a loop of polite rejection and awkward small talk. People pointed at other pieces, the ones with clean lines and muted colors, and said words like balanced and sophisticated. No one said anything like that near mine. By 9 o'clock, I was ready to grab my painting and disappear into the night, maybe sell it to the neighbor's cat. Then he walked in. He didn't look like the others. No scarf, no ironic glasses, no overdone posture of "I understand art." Just a man in a silver tie, tailored suit, calm eyes. He moved slowly through the room, saying little, studying everything. When he stopped in front of my painting, I froze. He tilted his head, not in mockery, in thought. After a full minute, he turned and caught me watching him. I braced for the usual, a polite smile, a quick nod, and a move to the next piece. Instead, he walked toward me. "Yours?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried. I nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of the paint stain on my sleeve. He looked back at the canvas. "It's messy." I laughed, nervous. "Yeah, that's kind of the point. Messy," he said again, but deliberate. "It feels alive, like something trying to entangle itself." No one had ever said anything like that before. I wanted to frame the sentence. He handed me a business card. "Ethan Vale, Creative Director, Marlowe and Associates." "I'd like to talk more," he said. "Do you sell your work?" I blinked. Technically, yes. Mostly to people who don't pay." He smiled, a small, knowing one, and said, "Call me Monday." Then he walked away. The next morning, I woke up half convinced I'd dreamed it. The business card was still there though, sitting on my kitchen counter like a prophecy. I turned it over in my hands while sipping instant coffee that tasted faintly of disbelief. For the first time in months, I felt something shifting, like the universe had stopped laughing and was finally listening. Of course, I didn't know it yet, but that conversation was the quiet spark before everything changed. My weird art was about to get a seat in a boardroom, and I'd have to decide what it meant to finally be seen. Monday came faster than I was emotionally prepared for. I'd spent all weekend rehearsing what to say on the phone, then decided to play it cool, which, in my case, meant writing a script, deleting it, and panicking anyway. When I finally called, Ethan answered on the second ring. "Ah," he said, his voice calm and smooth, "the artist from Saturday night." I tried to sound professional, but my mouth betrayed me. "Yeah, the one with the nervous system. Great start." He chuckled. "Would you be open to stopping by our office this week? I think there's something we can collaborate on." Collaborate. That word felt heavy and shiny all at once. His office was in one of those glass buildings that reflected the sky so perfectly you could almost forget there were people inside working 12-hour days. The lobby was all marble floors, corporate plants, and the faint smell of ambition. A receptionist led me through a hallway lined with sleek, abstract art that screamed, "We are successful, and we have taste." Ethan met me in a conference room so pristine it could have doubled as a surgery ward. He gestured for me to sit, and I instantly became hyper-aware of every paint stain on my jeans. "I've been thinking about your piece," he said, clicking open a presentation on a tablet. "We're renovating our reception area. We want something authentic, something that feels human, unpredictable. I think your work fits that." My brain short-circuited. I blinked. You mean, you want to buy one? He smiled. Commission one. We'd pay you, of course. The number he quoted next made my coffee-spattered heart stop. 5 figures. I tried not to visibly mouth the number, but I probably did. I walked out of that building floating 2 inches above the ground, clutching the contract like it was a newborn. On the way home, I laughed out loud, partly from disbelief, partly from terror. Somewhere, my high school art teacher's voice whispered, "The market doesn't reward weird." I whispered back, "Guess it just needed better lighting." For the next few weeks, my apartment became mission control. I sketched, mixed, and experimented like a scientist on caffeine. Ethan checked in occasionally polite emails with words like vision and emotional texture. I had no idea what that meant, but I nodded digitally. I worked differently this time, less frantic, more intentional. I wanted the piece to carry all my chaos, but in a way that could sit comfortably behind a receptionist's smile. Balancing rebellion and respectability was trickier than blending color. The painting grew slowly, layers of blue pulsing beneath crimson arcs, lines that twisted like veins and circuitry at once. I named it Symbiosis. Some nights, I'd stare at it for hours, half proud, half afraid it looked like something born from a blender accident. But when morning came and sunlight hit the surface, it glowed like it was breathing. While I painted, my life quietly shifted. My landlord stopped giving me the "you're late again" look. I bought groceries without converting every price to number of ramen packets. I even called my parents. Dad was stunned silent when I told him. Mom cried, "They're buying your art?" She kept asking, as if repetition would make it more believable. I could hear the pride under her disbelief, soft, shy, like a song she hadn't sung in years. When the piece was finally done, Ethan came to pick it up himself. He stood in my apartment doorway, immaculate as ever, surrounded by canvases and chaos. He studied Symbiosis for a long time. He paused, searching for the word, restless, but beautiful. I smiled. Story of my life, he nodded. Ours too, probably. After he left, the room felt emptier than it ever had. Like something vital had been carried out with that painting, but also lighter, like I'd finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. The next email came 2 weeks later, an invitation to the unveiling at their office. A big event, he said. Press, partners, champagne, the works. I stared at the screen, half grinning, half terrified. Because as much as I'd wanted to be seen, the idea of being looked at still made me feel naked. Still, I clicked yes, I'll attend. The day I once imagined as impossible was now a calendar notification. And somewhere deep down, the weird kid with the soggy sketchbook whispered, "We did it." Kind of. When I walked into Marlowe and Associates for the second time, everything looked different, or maybe it was me. The same receptionist smiled a little too brightly, and I caught my reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. Same thrift store jacket, same messy hair, but a face that had aged a decade in confidence. The painting now hung in the lobby, half covered by a pristine white drape. There was a podium, some floral arrangements that smelled faintly of money, and a small crowd of well-dressed strangers holding flutes of champagne. Someone was adjusting lighting, muttering words like contrast and tone. The air buzzed with polite excitement. Ethan found me near the coffee table, which looked like it cost more than my old apartment. "Nervous?" he asked. I smiled, only existentially. He laughed, the kind of laugh that told me he'd been in too many rooms like this to be fazed by much. "Don't worry," he said. "They'll love it." I wanted to believe him, but part of me still expected someone to tap my shoulder and say, "Sorry, wrong artist." The CEO arrived tall, confident, perfectly tanned, and launched into a speech about innovation, creativity, and embracing unconventional perspectives. I nearly choked on my drink at that last part. This was the same company whose HR email templates probably came in beige. When they finally pulled the drape off, Symbiosis lit up under the spotlight like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. Reds shimmered into blues, gold veins pulsed through the surface. It was alive, exactly as I'd hoped. The room went quiet for a beat, then applause. Real applause. I didn't know where to look at the painting, the crowd, or the surreal version of my life unfolding in front of me. For a moment, I let it sink in. They were clapping for me. Afterward, people came up to congratulate me, most of them repeating the same phrases in different tones. It's so bold, really unique, very emotional. The ellipses did most of the heavy lifting, but still they were smiling, not laughing. Progress. One man in a suit said, I didn't think color could feel aggressive, but somehow it does. I grinned. That's because it's holding a grudge. He laughed politely, probably assuming I was joking. I wasn't entirely. As the evening went on, I found myself drifting through the crowd like a ghost at my own funeral, everyone celebrating the part of me they'd once ignored. Ethan stood beside me occasionally, introducing me as the artist behind the piece, and I tried to play along, nodding modestly, sipping something sparkling that didn't taste like my life. A woman from marketing asked for a photo. We want to post it on our socials. Marlo supports their Tarsh kind of thing. I agreed, of course, though the irony nearly made me choke again. When I finally stepped back and looked at Symbiosis from a distance, something in me softened. There it was, my chaos, my insomnia, my ramen-fueled rebellion now framed in elegance, guarded by security, watched over by people who once mocked my kind. It was poetic, in a capitalism meets karma way. Over the next weeks, life changed quickly. My name began popping up in small magazines and blogs. Up-and-coming contemporary artist makes waves in corporate art scene. I got new commissions, more emails, and the occasional message from old classmates who suddenly always believed in my talent. My landlord even called to say he'd seen me in the paper right before reminding me that rent was still due on the 1st. But not everything glittered. Success, I discovered, comes with paperwork, contracts, NDAs, copyright forms, a bureaucracy of validation. My studio became less of a sanctuary and more of a to-do list. Every painting started to feel a little performative, like I was repainting my own cage, just with better colors. Once, late at night, I visited the office lobby unannounced. The building was nearly empty, the lights dimmed. My painting glowed faintly in the dark, surreal and a little lonely. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection flicker over the surface. It was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to their walls, their brand, their narrative. Still, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that hummed beneath the melancholy. The kid who was told their art was too weird had become decor for the establishment. Revenge, it turned out, looked fantastic under LED lighting. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was supposed to be the big one. More press, more champagne, more people pretending to understand art while checking their emails. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was supposed to be the big one. More press, more champagne, more people pretending to understand art while checking their emails. The invitation came embossed with silver lettering, the kind that says, "We spent money on this, so please be impressed." I almost didn't go. I'd already attended the unveiling, smiled for the photos, played the grateful artist. But Ethan called personally. "You should be here," he said. "It's your work. It's part of our story now. Our story." That phrase itched a little, but I went anyway. Curiosity, vanity, maybe a little closure. The lobby looked even more polished than before. My painting was now encased behind subtle glass, with a brass plaque beside it reading, "Symbiosis on loan from the artist." On loan, like I'd given them a child I might one day reclaim. I liked that, actually. A local journalist interviewed me, asking the same questions I'd already answered in emails. What inspired you? What does the piece represent? How does it feel to have your work displayed here? I gave the usual half-truths inspired by emotion, about human connection. I'm honored, all true in some vague press-friendly way. What I didn't say was that it felt like winning a race I didn't remember starting. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. A small group gathered near the entrance, familiar faces from another lifetime. My former coworkers, the same people who'd laughed when I quit my dull office job years ago, the ones who'd called me the starving artist behind my back, sometimes to my face. They were older now, better dressed, still orbiting the same beige planet. Wait, one of them said, eyes widening. That's your painting? I smiled. Apparently. You work with Marlowe now? I shrugged. Sort of. They work with me. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The proof was 30 square feet of acrylic rebellion glowing behind me. Their expressions were priceless, half pride, half panic, like realizing the class clown had become the principal. One of them, James, the guy who used to tease me for bringing sketchbooks to lunch, said, "Man, I always knew you'd do something creative." I almost laughed. Not cruelly, just softly, like someone who's heard the punchline before. You mean weird, I said. He chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, well, weird sells now. That line stuck with me. Weird sells now. Not weird matters. Not weird means something. Just sells. Later, during the official ribbon cutting, the CEO gave another speech about innovation and risk-taking, pausing dramatically before unveiling symbiosis once again for the cameras. Applause filled the room, flashes popped, and I stood at the edge of it all, both central and invisible at the same time. Ethan joined me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. You should be proud, he said. I am, I replied, just not sure of what. He tilted his head. What do you mean? I gestured toward the painting. That thing up there, it came from the ugliest, messiest part of me. Now it's sanitized, framed, safe. He smiled faintly. That's what people do, isn't it? They take what scares them and make it decorative. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The crowd was laughing at something the CEO said, and I wondered if any of them really saw the piece, or if it was just another shiny backdrop for networking photos. Does it bother you? Ethan asked quietly. I looked at the painting again, the reds, the blues, the pulse still visible beneath the polish. A little, I said, but maybe that's good. Art should itch. He raised his glass. Then here's to discomfort. We clinked glasses and I drank, tasting success with a hint of irony. By the end of the night, I slipped out before the speeches ended, walking through the empty streets with my tie loosened and my shoes clicking on the wet pavement. I passed a cafe where a couple sat sketching on napkins, laughing over their lopsided drawings. For a second, I missed being them, unnoticed, unproven, completely free. At a red light, I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Same face, but framed differently. The world hadn't changed, it just decided I was worth looking at. And that, I realized, was the quietest kind of revenge, not shouting "I told you so," but smiling while they hang your madness in a lobby and call it visionary. They think the story ends there, the prodigal artist returning to the temple, the painting hung high, applause echoing like redemption. They think the story ends there, the prodigal artist returning to the temple, the painting hung high, applause echoing like redemption. But art never ends with applause. It lingers in silence, in the space between what people see and what you meant. Every morning now, my inbox fills with new invitations, corporate commissions, visionary collaborations, press requests with subject lines like "the artist who broke the mold." I don't reply to most of them. Fame, I've learned, is just another kind of job, one that pays in attention and drains in meaning. Sometimes I walk past that building on purpose. The lobby's glass reflects the city like a still pond. My painting stares back at me from behind that expensive frame, its colors slightly dulled by the fluorescent light. People pass it without looking. Some stop for a second, nod, take a selfie. A few read the plaque and move on, probably to a meeting about synergy or KPIs. None of them know that the texture beneath those brush strokes comes from shredded eviction notices, that the faint gray underlayer is made from the ash of burned rejection letters, that the pattern winding through the blue isn't random as my old company's logo, distorted and buried under paint until it became something unrecognizable. They see abstraction. I see evidence. Sometimes I imagine the CEO giving a tour, saying things like, "This piece represents innovation." And I smile, because it doesn't. It represents defiance. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, just exists, stubbornly, beautifully. A few months after the ribbon cutting, I got a message from a young artist, just a DM that said, "They told me my work was too weird. Then I found yours. Thanks for proving it can work." That one message meant more than all the glossy interviews combined. It reminded me why I started painting in the first place, not for recognition, but for resonance, for the quiet ripple that moves unseen. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop needing applause. When you realize you were never supposed to fit in, you were supposed to stand out. The laughter, the doubt, the nights of ramen and rot, they were all pigments in the same palette. Now, when I paint, I still think of them sometimes, the skeptics, the smirks, the silver tie collectors, but not with anger anymore. More like gratitude. They gave me friction, and friction gives fire its shape. Art isn't revenge, it's reclamation. It is taking what broke you and turning it into something that makes them stop and look, even if they don't understand why. So, yes, my art hangs in their lobby now, but it's not theirs. It never was. It's mine. And every time they walk by it, nodding in polite appreciation, they're breathing the same air as the thing they once called too weird to matter. That's enough. That's more than enough.